The house on Saratoga Trail looked like safety. Quiet street, trimmed lawns, children's bikes near the driveway. The kind of place where nothing terrible is supposed to happen. And that assumption is where this story begins. On the morning of August 13th, 2018, Shanann Watts failed to respond to messages. For most people, that would mean nothing. For those who knew her, it meant everything. Shanann documented her life meticulously. She communicated constantly. Silence was not part of her pattern. By early afternoon, concern had hardened into fear. Police arrived at the Watts home expecting a welfare check. They did not expect a crime scene. The house was orderly. The beds were made. Shoes were still by the door. No signs of forced entry. No obvious struggle. Just absence. Chris Watts stood in the doorway, hands on hips, calm. He spoke softly, answered questions politely, presented himself as a worried husband. He told officers his wife had taken the children to a friend's house. It was a plausible explanation. Too plausible. From the beginning, the case was not about violence. It was about normalcy, and how easily normalcy can deceive. Chris Watts was not what people imagine when they think of a family annihilator. He did not fit the profile. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, no public rage. He was quiet, polite, unremarkable, which is exactly why the story unsettles. As body camera footage rolled, the cracks began to show. Chris smiled at the wrong moments, laughed softly when describing his missing family, failed to display urgency. These are not proofs, but they are signals, and signals matter when there is nothing else to hold on to. Within hours, friends noticed inconsistencies. Shanann's phone was still in the house. Her purse remained untouched. Her car was parked in the garage. A woman planning to leave does not leave those things behind. A mother does not disappear without her children's medication. The story was already unraveling. The first public plea came that same day. Chris Watts stood before cameras. He asked for his family to come home. His voice cracked, but his eyes did not. This was not a performance error. It was something deeper, an absence of internal alignment. The words were correct. The emotions were not. Investigators did not yet know what they were dealing with, but instinct had already shifted. This was no longer a missing persons case. It was a waiting game. Chris Watts agreed to a polygraph test. He did not hesitate. People who believe they can manage perception often believe they can manage truth. The polygraph examiner asked simple questions. Did you lie? Did you hurt your wife? Do you know where your children are? Chris failed, decisively, not marginally, not ambiguously, physiologically undeniable. When confronted with the results, Chris collapsed, but not into grief, into negotiation. His first confession was partial. He claimed Shanann killed the children. He claimed he killed her in rage. This was not truth, it was strategy. False confessions often reveal more than silence. They expose motive through deflection. By blaming Shanann, Chris revealed what mattered most to him. Not his children, not accuracy, control. Investigators did not accept the story. They pressed, and the mask broke completely. Chris Watts confessed again, this time without the fiction. He admitted to killing Shanann. He admitted to killing Bella and Celeste. He described the acts with chilling detachment, as if recounting chores. The murders were not impulsive, they were planned, executed with horrifying calm. Chris had been having an affair, Nicole Kessinger, a woman who represented escape, a life without responsibility, without financial strain, without children. The murders did not happen in rage, they happened in calculation. Chris Watts wanted a reset, and he chose annihilation over accountability. The disposal of the bodies confirmed this. Shanann was buried in a shallow grave. The children were placed in oil tanks. This was not panic, this was logistics. The banality of the choices is what haunts the case. No symbolism, no frenzy, no chaos, just efficiency. American Murder forces a confrontation with a terrifying idea that evil does not always look like rage. Sometimes it looks like compliance. Friends described Chris as passive, conflict avoidant, emotionally vacant. These traits are not crimes, but when paired with entitlement and resentment, they become dangerous. Chris did not snap, he disengaged. He withdrew emotionally until people became obstacles and obstacles were removed. Shanann Watts has often been mischaracterized, too controlling, too loud, too present online. These narratives emerged quickly. They always do. Blame seek the home. But none of those traits explain murder. They explain discomfort, and discomfort is not justification. Bella and Celeste were not collateral damage. They were impediments. This is the truth that viewers resist, because it is unbearable. The murders were not about hatred, they were about erasure. American Murder does not linger on gore, it lingers on silence, on text messages unanswered, on phone calls ignored, on the slow realization that a family did not vanish, they were deleted. Chris Watts accepted a plea deal. No trial, no public airing of evidence, no prolonged denial, just finality. Life without parole. The legal system moved on. The questions did not. Why did no one see it? The answer is unsettling, because there was nothing obvious to see. Family annihilators often present as ordinary. That is how they succeed. The Watts case dismantles the myth of warning signs. There are sometimes none, or they exist only in hindsight. This story is not about marital conflict. It is about emotional vacancy, about a man who lacked the internal architecture to confront consequences. Chris Watts did not want to be seen as a villain. He wanted to be free. And when freedom required destruction, destruction became acceptable. The family next door was not unlucky. They were vulnerable to someone who decided their existence was inconvenient. This case lingers because it cannot be explained away. There is no single cause, no singular moment, just a sequence of small withdrawals that ended in catastrophe. The house on Saratoga Trail still stands, new occupants, fresh paint, but history does not vacate quietly. The most dangerous lie is that monsters are recognizable. They are not.
After the confession, the public expected clarity. They did not receive it. What they received instead was a deeper unease, because Chris Watts did not confess like a man overwhelmed by guilt. He confessed like a man adjusting to an outcome he could no longer control. His language remained flat, his tone measured, his affect restrained. There was no emotional collapse, only acceptance. This absence of visible remorse became one of the most disturbing elements of the case, not because grief must follow a script, but because Chris Watts never appeared to enter grief at all. He moved directly from denial to explanation. Psychologists who later analyzed the case struggled to place him neatly within diagnostic boxes. He did not present as overtly psychopathic, he was not impulsive, he was not outwardly cruel. Instead, he displayed something quieter and more unsettling: emotional vacancy. Chris Watts spent most of his life reacting rather than initiating. He complied, he deferred, he avoided confrontation. To the outside world, this looked like passivity. Inside, it bred resentment. Resentment without expression does not dissipate, it accumulates, and when it finally moves, it does not negotiate. Shanann Watts was often framed as dominant. She was outspoken, organized, socially visible. She handled finances, schedules, decisions. This dynamic became a focal point for armchair psychology. But dominance is not abuse, and passivity is not victimhood. Chris Watts was not controlled, he was disengaged, and disengagement can be just as corrosive as conflict. The affair with Nicole Kessinger did not create the violence, it exposed the emptiness. Nicole represented something Chris Watts had never cultivated internally, a sense of self. With Nicole, he was decisive. He spoke openly, he fantasized about a future, he described freedom. Not freedom from abuse, freedom from obligation. This distinction matters. Chris Watts did not want a different relationship. He wanted a different life, one without accountability. Financial pressure played a role. The Watts family was under strain. Debt, missed payments, bankruptcy history. These are stressors. They are not causes. Millions live with financial stress without committing murder. What Chris Watts lacked was not money, it was psychological resilience. The murders were not the result of a sudden break. They were the endpoint of sustained internal withdrawal. He stopped seeing his family as people. They became barriers, and barriers were removed.
The order of the killings matters. Shanann was killed first, the children afterward. This sequence eliminates the rage narrative. Rage is chaotic. This was controlled. Bella and Celeste were awake. They witnessed what had already happened. This detail is unbearable. It is also critical. Chris Watts later described Bella asking him if the same thing was going to happen to her. He answered. Then he acted. This moment dismantles any remaining illusions. This was not dissociation. This was choice. Many people struggle to comprehend how a parent crosses that line. The answer is not hatred. It is objectification. Chris Watts no longer perceived his children as autonomous beings. They were extensions of a life he wanted to erase, and erasure became easier than responsibility. The disposal of the bodies reinforces this psychological state. Oil tanks, industrial, anonymous, final. There was no attempt at concealment driven by panic, only procedure. After his arrest, Chris Watts began cooperating fully. He waived rights, he answered questions, he detailed actions. This cooperation was not redemptive, it was pragmatic. He had lost control of the narrative. He sought to regain control through compliance. Public reaction exploded. The case struck a nerve, not because family murder was new, but because it shattered assumptions. The American cultural myth of safety inside the home fractured. If a man like Chris Watts could do this, then predictability itself became suspect. Online, blame redistributed rapidly. Shanann's personality, her social media presence, her spending. These critiques emerged immediately. They always do. Victim reassessment is a reflex. It creates emotional distance. If the victim is flawed, the crime feels less random, less threatening. This instinct is dangerous. It shifts focus away from accountability, and it obscures the real lesson. Chris Watts did not kill because Shanann was demanding. He killed because he lacked the internal capacity to confront conflict without annihilation. The documentary's use of real footage intensifies this realization. Text messages, videos, voicemails. These artifacts collapse distance. The audience does not observe history, they relive it. This creates a unique ethical tension. The victims are preserved in high resolution. Their lives become content.
American Murder avoids reenactments. It avoids dramatization. It lets reality speak, and reality is devastating. The absence of music during key moments amplifies discomfort. Silence becomes accusatory. Unlike cases built on ambiguity, this one offers certainty. Chris Watts did it. The question shifts. Why did no one see it? The answer remains deeply unsettling. Because there was little to see. No pattern of violence, no explosive arguments, no criminal history. Predictive policing models fail here. Profiling collapses. Chris Watts was not a warning sign, he was a blind spot. This forces a reckoning with how society identifies danger. We look for volatility, we overlook vacancy. Family annihilators often share this trait. They disengage quietly. They do not threaten, they disappear emotionally before acting physically. After sentencing, Chris Watts participated in additional interviews. These conversations added little clarity. He spoke in abstractions. He expressed regret without depth. He referenced faith. These statements did not heal, they disturbed, because they felt performative. Remorse without empathy rings hollow, and empathy never appeared. The justice system closed the case swiftly. No trial, no jury deliberation, no public reckoning. This was efficient. It was also unsatisfying. Without a trial, many questions remained unexplored, not about guilt, about process. How do systems detect internal collapse? How do families intervene before disengagement becomes annihilation? How does society respond without resorting to myth? American Murder does not answer these questions. It leaves them exposed. The Watts case altered how true crime is consumed. It stripped away mystery. What remained was banality. There was no elaborate plan, no grand ideology, just a man who wanted a life without consequences. This is why the case refuses to fade. It offers no distance, no comforting narrative, no villain we can easily separate from the ordinary. Chris Watts did not look dangerous. He looked familiar. And that familiarity is the most frightening detail of all.
When a case offers certainty, the public expects relief. The Watts case offered none, because certainty about guilt does not equal understanding, and understanding is what people keep searching for. After the plea deal, the system closed its file. No jury deliberation, no cross-examination, no competing narratives tested in open court. Efficiency replaced inquiry. From an institutional perspective, the case was resolved. From a human one, it had barely begun. True crime audiences often believe ambiguity is what fuels obsession. The Watts case proved the opposite. Certainty can be just as destabilizing, because when the why remains hollow, the mind keeps circling. Chris Watts did not leave a manifesto. He did not articulate a coherent motive. He did not claim ideological justification. He simply removed what stood between him and the life he imagined. This is where many people instinctively reach for labels: psychopath, narcissist, monster. Labels provide distance. They reassure us that this could not happen nearby. But the danger of labels is that they simplify, and simplification obscures patterns that repeat. Chris Watts was not driven by rage. He was driven by avoidance. Avoidance of conflict, avoidance of shame, avoidance of responsibility. Avoidance can be deadly when paired with entitlement. The Watts case reframes how we understand coercive passivity. Chris did not dominate his household. He withdrew from it. He did not argue. He disengaged. And disengagement allowed fantasy to replace reality. In his internal world, obligations dissolved. People became variables, and once people are variables, harm becomes procedural. This is why the case unsettles therapists and criminologists. It does not fit traditional escalation models. There were no documented threats, no prior assaults, no visible buildup. The collapse was internal, invisible until it was irreversible. American Murder forces viewers to confront the limitations of surveillance culture. We assume constant documentation creates safety. Shanann documented everything. Her life was visible. Her marriage was visible. Her disappearance was immediate and noticed, and still it did not protect her. Visibility did not equal safety. In fact, visibility may have accelerated Chris Watts' sense of exposure. His dissatisfaction was not private. It existed alongside a curated image of family success. This created cognitive dissonance, and dissonance demanded resolution. For emotionally resilient people, dissonance leads to conversation. For emotionally vacant people, it leads to erasure. The documentary's structure reinforces this truth. There is no narrator guiding emotion, no authoritative voice explaining behavior, just footage, messages, silence. This absence of mediation places responsibility on the viewer. You are not told what to feel, you are left with it. This is ethically powerful and ethically dangerous. True crime invites proximity to trauma, but proximity can blur empathy into consumption. The Watts case sits on that edge. Bella and Celeste appear in videos laughing, playing, trusting. These images haunt. They also risk exploitation. The ethical question becomes unavoidable. How do we remember victims without turning them into artifacts? American Murder avoids sensational reenactments. It avoids stylized violence, but it cannot avoid repetition. Each viewing reopens wounds. For Shanann's family, the documentary is not analysis, it is reliving. The audience often debates Chris Watts endlessly. Was he always capable? Did something snap? Was the affair decisive? These debates miss the core reality. Capability does not announce itself. It emerges under conditions, and conditions are often banal. The Watts case does not warn us to watch for anger. It warns us to watch for emptiness. Emptiness that avoids confrontation. Emptiness that seeks escape without consequence. Emptiness that reframes people as burdens. This pattern appears again and again in family annihilation cases. Not chaos, control.